Hello, everyone. Since my new book, The Lost Mary, Rediscovering the Mother of Jesus, came out a few weeks ago, I've been doing a lot of traveling and speaking, lecturing, book signings, and so forth. And I've done several major in-depth interviews about the book, really delving into it. This one in particular really goes into depth, exploring all sorts of issues in the book. It runs for almost 2 hours. And the host of the interview is Aaron Abke of the Jesus Way podcast. I've done several interviews with Aaron on a variety of subjects, but I really did enjoy this one. He had read the book and thoroughly absorbed it, and it was very pleasurable to do the interview. So I want to share it with you, and I hope you learn a lot from it, and I hope you'll get the book and read it. Of all the books I published, I spent the most time on this one in terms of research. It's got a lot of notes at the back, but the text itself is very accessible and very readable.
I'm joined today by Dr. James Tabor, who's going to unpack some of the amazing information in his new book, The Lost Mary, Rediscovering the Mother of Jesus. So, Dr. Tabor, congrats on your new book and welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
It's great to be with you, and I love interviewing with you and your colleagues, James, and even Cameron that comes on. And I have a copy of my book, but look at this picture. I want to start with that because it's by an Italian painter. I'm not going to tell you the name, it's in the book, what he had in mind, but what do you have in mind? Because if that's not the Mona Lisa of the ancient world, I don't know who it is. Because what is she thinking? The burden of the cosmos is on this woman, isn't it? I mean, is
Yeah.
she thinking about the future of her precious sons that are going to get brutally killed? Is she wondering how things are going to go? How old is she? I just love the cover. Absolutely love it. So,
I do too. I was going to say, this is an absolutely gorgeous book. This might be one of the most beautiful books I've ever bought. It feels amazing. The typography is gorgeous. Just well done all the way around on this one, man.
I know people love the audio, and I read the book, Aaron. I actually read it aloud. It's rare that
You read
authors
your
do
own book.
that. But my publisher said, you've got to read it aloud because you talk so much about when I was at Cephas, and I'll never forget the day I did this. And you don't want somebody else saying that. They weren't there. That's you. It took me 3 days in a studio, grueling, because none of us can read more than a page or two without stumbling or missing something. And
Mhm.
you have these engineers and headphones, and they're going, wait, go back. But
Yeah.
despite that, Kindle, everything. I told Cameron, our friend Cameron, he likes to listen, and that's fine. You hear me read it, but there's something about this particular book to touch it, to hold it. It really. I mean, when I got my first copy, you don't quite imagine how it'll be, even though you've seen the cover and so forth. Yeah, I think this is a book people will treasure. So,
Who is your publisher?
Knopf, Knof.
Oh, there it
Knopf
is.
is a
Yeah.
specialty publisher as part of Penguin Random House. They tend to do very
Okay.
high level books, very selective, their repertoire. So to be even selected by Knopf, my previous books were with Simon and Schuster. Simon Schuster's great. They do all the great kiss and tell books and all the bestsellers. Knopf is a little more selective. So they just, they have very special criteria for accepting books. So I was thrilled. They're wonderful to work with. So, yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
They did a masterpiece on this one. And I recently recorded my book in studio as well for the Audible. And as you
Oh,
said, it was
well,
incredibly
the
grueling.
people
Yeah,
who,
your voice gets tired and you got to do
Mhm.
retakes. And so I was listening to your Audible with a new perspective now. Like I can sort of tell where you had to start a new session, based on the tonality of your voice. And I
They do
wouldn't
a
I
good
wouldn't
job
want to read
putting
your
it
books
together.
on Audible with anyone else's voice but yours, because I think you just have a way of reading your own literature that other people can't match. Because something that you do here in this book is you pull out so many fascinating historical gems that I've been studying biblical scholarship for 5 years pretty obsessively, and I learned so much from reading this book just on the historicity behind Mary and kind of her whole Davidic lineage. So if you're ready to jump in, I can start with the first question.
I'm ready. Yeah, looking forward to
Okay.
it. Thank you.
So the first place I want to start with this, Dr. Tabor, is just what do you mean by the lost Mary? Because Mary isn't lost. Everybody knows Mary. She's the Blessed Virgin, perpetual virgin who gave birth to Jesus in the Immaculate Conception. And then she lived out the rest of her life quietly as a Catholic nun. So why have you titled this book The Lost Mary? Are you peddling some kind of conspiracy theory here?
Right. Well, the first line of the book answers your question, and then we'll unpack it. Mary is the best known, least known woman in history. We
I
thought
love
of
that line.
calling it the real Mary, but the real Jesus, the real this, the real that, the untold story. It just got kind of tired. So we just went for the big word, the big L word, lost. She's lost. She's forgotten. When somebody's lost, they're basically forgotten. So how could Mary, the best known woman in the world, be lost? That's your question. It's an obvious question. Now, the subtitle is interesting: A New Historical Investigation of the Most Powerful Woman in the World. Now, there again, we're playing with this tension, this contradiction, this juxtaposition: best known, least known. By any measure, she is the most powerful and influential woman in all of history. Millions of people pray to her every day and depend upon her with all their heart and soul. And I wrote in the chapter one, as you saw, I consider this book a contribution to Marian devotion and spirituality. Now, you would think, oh, Tabor's turning Catholic or something, which I'm not, because I don't think she was a nun. To put it bluntly, I want to return her to her Jewish people. To even say what she lost, to describe her as lost, you've got to say, well, how has she lost, or what did she lose? Because these are things that she lost. So it's not just us losing her, but what has she lost in the minds of millions of people? Let's start with her faith. We don't have to use the term Jew or Judaism. Her biblical faith, which is the ancient Hebrew Bible. People would say, Mary's not really Jewish, is she? We finally got used to calling Jesus Jewish in academic circles after how many years, 150 years of historical Jesus studies. It's not shocking to say, Jesus was Jewish. Although, I will say this, Aaron, you get this. Occasionally, I will have people in comments and so forth, not necessarily anti-Semitic, some of them are, but a lot of them don't understand, well, he's not really Jewish, because they're thinking he's Christian. Jesus is Christian.
Right.
Well, if you define Christian as messianism, absolutely, he's a messianist. But so was Mary. Messianism means that you have attached yourself to a figure whom you believe to be the promised Davidic Messiah. That's how it's normally used in our culture. Christianity is just an entity of that idea, Christ or Messiah. But look what Mary's lost. I could just tick it off. So she's lost her Jewish faith. Now, that would be everything from preparing for Shabbat. What did Mary do on a Friday night? How did the bread smell through the house? This is a big family. I suggest that she has 7, 8, 9 or more children, because we don't know how many sisters. We have the 5 boys' name. Jesus, of course, everybody knows Jesus. But James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon, what about them? So, and then the sisters. So she's a Jewish woman preparing for Shabbat. What about the festivals? Is she getting ready for Christmas or Easter? We could even throw in Halloween because of our season. What sort of holy days and holidays did she keep? And these would be commonly known to our culture. Yom Kippur, probably the best known. Rosh Hashanah, people call it the Jewish New Year. But Passover, certainly. And Pentecost or Shavuot, Sukkot, which we just got through, the Feast of Tabernacles. and the last great day and so forth, all of these Jewish things. So she's Jewish, but she's also been robbed of those children. According to the dogma of the church, Mary is not only the Virgin Mary, she's ever virgin. There's actually a term for it. She's a perpetual virgin. Mary never had sexual intercourse. Now, what you're doing there is removing her from the human realm. It starts slowly. First, you're not Jewish, you're up here. And now you're not a married woman who regularly loves and sleeps with her husband and has pregnancies and childbirth and all that bonding that people know who have children that they love and a wife or husband that they love. No, Mary can't have any of that. And you keep on going from there. And you think about, well, what else? Well, she's actually been removed from her culture, not just her religion, but what was it like to be in occupied Roman Palestine, or the land of Israel? The Romans later called it Palestine. Scholars call it Palestine, but the Holy Land. What was it like? What was the history like? So, as you remarked in your opening, I say a lot of things about the contextualization of Mary. What world did she live in? Did you know? You do know because you read the book and you might have already known it. Mary is probably an urban woman, an urban girl, let's call her. You know, she grows up in Sepphoris. And again, my students, everybody, what did you say, Sepphoris? Could you spell that? I've never heard of that. I thought she was from Nazareth. Well, what is Nazareth? Nazareth is a small village that is a suburb just 4 miles south of Sipori in Hebrew, Sepphoris, the major urban capital of the Galilee. Herod Antipas had his capital there, his royal palace. Jesus refers to that once. He says, you know, those that are kings live in royal palaces and clothe themselves with these fine purple garments. Well, he had seen that growing up. He grew up in Nazareth, we think. That's right outside Sepphoris. But what was daily life like? I picture Aaron, those boys as they grew older, becoming tekton. Remember, carpenters, that's translated. But a better translation would be builder. Technology, architect is probably our best parallel. The chief tech is the one tech or technology that you're building something, you're constructing something together. So Joseph is called the father a tekton, and Jesus is called son of a tekton, and it doesn't just mean son of in the sense of who is his father, but when you say I'm the son of a carpenter, you mean that's my profession. I'm an apprentice. I've learned carpentry, but it's not really carpentry. It's probably building, the building trades, let's call it. That would be the rough equivalent. So, what's it like to have that family get up? The boys are going to head to work, probably 4:35 in the morning. They're going to be headed for Sepphoris. I've walked it many times. It takes about 45 minutes to get from Nazareth over the hill, down the valley, the Beit Netofa Valley, up to Sepphoris. This is the city set on a hill that cannot be hid. Jesus, all of his life, as he lived and walked around Nazareth growing up, could look any time at night and see this gleaming city just a few miles to the north. And I think he
Wow.
probably worked there. I've excavated there 3 different seasons with Professor Jim Strange, who's now passed away. Really miss him. He was such a great scholar of what we love, archaeology and Judeo Christianity and so forth. He's written major things on that people can still get. Just check Jim Strange. And then James Strange's son is an active archaeologist today who just wrote a wonderful book, Archaeology and the Land of Jesus. I reviewed it for the Journal of Biblical Literature. It's
Ooh,
a
sounds
beautiful
interesting.
book. I love the phrase archaeology in the land of Jesus, not biblical
Yeah.
archaeology, but just in the land of Jesus. And what is that like? So we know a lot about it. We know what daily life was like. I try to capture that. So she's got this large family, the sisters, the brothers, and you begin to picture her as the matriarch of a Jewish home. But it's a special home because it's Davidic. In other words, she knows that her children are from the lineage of King David. And I know we're going to get into that later, but I'm just giving the highlights here. And so this is that's not just any family. This is a family with royal, Davidic, and priestly ancestry. So it's a distinguished family. You know, people are fond of making Jesus and his mother and his whole family backward, illiterate peasants, probably couldn't read. They're very poor, just dirt poor, maybe doing day labor. This is imagination. And I think there's good evidence that if you're a builder, and Joseph has a kind of a business, you might say, and Cephas, by the way, went up in flames in 4 BC, the year Herod the Great died, the great king of the Jews, Herod. People know him from the Christmas story, right? That was in 4 BC, we think. Most people date it. Some say 3, some say 2, but we're going to go with 4. That's the standard date. I have a chronology table in the front of the book of the dates that I generally use. They could move a little bit one way or the other, but generally they're what most of us have come to. Well, guess what happened? Revolts broke out in the Galilee and also across the Jordan and down in the Jerusalem area as well. So you had Judas, son of Hezekiah. This is not Judas the Galilean from later in the year 6 CE or AD. There was another revolt from another Judas who's not connected to this Judas. Well, Jesus has a brother named Judas. It's a kind of revolutionary name, Judas Maccabee. Have you remember that? I know you know it well.
Oh, yeah.
He's revolutionary. So here's Judas, son of Hezekiah. He wants to overthrow Roman power. Since Herod has died, there's a vacuum there. Well, Jesus is probably a nursing baby. So, and Cephas is utterly destroyed by the Romans. They come down with 3 legions from Syria. Varus is in charge, the Roman general, the famous Roman general. This is under the reign of Emperor Augustus. And they level the city and burn it to the ground in punishment for participating in the revolt. And boy, they learned their lesson. Well, then Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, was made tetrarch or ruler of the whole Galilee, and that's when Jesus is born. So Herod Antipas is an adult. He's older than Jesus. So he's building his palace. He's building his gleaming city. And the historian Josephus that lived and saw Sepphoris, he visited it. So we're getting an eyewitness account. He said it was the most splendid city in the Galilee. He calls it the jewel of the Galilee, surrounded by 240 villages all over the Galilee. So we're not talking about this backwater out in the country, a couple of hours, living, scratching your life out of the dirt. This is Roman roads going north, south, and east and west, right through Nazareth, the area of Nazareth and Cephas. So you've got caravans, you've got Roman soldiers, you've got trade and commerce. And Mary is born in Cephas, we think. That's the tradition we have. You can even visit the Crusader and Byzantine ruins of her house. I don't necessarily know that it's her house, but it was identified in the early Christian period as her house. And actually, there's a church there to remember that. But it's in Cephas, not Nazareth. There also is a church in Nazareth. So what we think is that Mary is married to Joseph, probably arranged marriage by her parents. And then they moved to Nazareth, where Joseph is from. So she takes up residence with her husband. And as far as the perpetual virginity, it's a very theological idea, and we want to talk about it more. But let me just quote one text that many of your listeners will be familiar with because they study the Bible. Matthew 1:25. Jesus is born, right? It's the Christmas story. Chapter 1. And what does it say? And he knew her not, Joseph. He knew her not until she had brought forth her firstborn son. And later in Mark 6:3, we have the children named, unfortunately not the girls, but the boys. And I named them previously. So James, Joseph, Jude, Simon, Jesus, and the girls, we think maybe Mary was one of them, Salome perhaps, and we're not sure of the third or the fourth, but there's different later traditions about them and what their names might have been much, much later, like into the Crusader period. But either way, they're girls and boys. It's a big family. And so all the time that Jesus is growing up, that family is developing and they're living a normal married life, and Jesus is working. So people talk about, what about the lost years of Jesus, Dr. Tabor? Did he go off to India and study with the gymnosophists and pick up, a little bit of Buddhist philosophy? Did he go to Egypt and learn the secrets of Egyptian mystery religions? Possibly, there's stories about that, but they're rather late. I just put him working every day at Cephas. And the working class people that work with their hands, that work in the trades, understand what that's like. You have 6 days a week. You get up in the morning and go to work, and you are so glad when the Sabbath comes because you get a day off and you get to be with your family and get to rest. Remember, Sabbath means stop. And to this day, it's the same blessing. So you think of all those things about Mary, the large family, the Jewish life, the situation that she grew up in. I think she's educated, but I don't mean she went to college. They didn't have college per se, but it's a Jewish home. Jewish homes are literate homes. They have to be. Why are they literate? Because you're reading the Torah and the prophets in the synagogue, and you're hearing the prayers. And, I have a Jewish prayer book right here. I know you have a Jewish prayer book as part of your resources. Most Jews have those prayers memorized. They've said them so many times. They're things you say in the morning. They're things you say at meals. Hebrew only has 24 letters, 22 plus 2. You've studied Hebrew. When I teach Hebrew to my students, I teach them the alphabet in 1 week. And they work a little bit with the hey, looking a little bit the same as the het, but there's a little difference. It takes them another week to go, oh yeah, sorry,
We'll
Dr.
get there.
That's a hey, not a het. But in 2 weeks, and the vowels, 7 or 8 vowels, depending on the compound vowels. How long does it take? A person of more than average intelligence would just consider, yeah, can I read? Yes, I've said this prayer every day of my life, and these are the letters. I think I could figure that out. Now, a lot of my colleagues disagree. Oh, Tabor, you're just fantasizing. Everybody was illiterate. Well, I don't think it's true of a Jewish home. I really don't. And I think Jesus studies and reads, and maybe at the synagogue, they have the scrolls. People are allowed to go there and study. Later we see him in the temple, and he's talking to doctors of the law, they're called, authorities of the law, meaning experts in the Torah and all of its interpretations. Now, it could be a legendary story, but it's a great childhood story. He's 12 years old, and he's in the temple. And what do you do in the temple? You sit around in Solomon's portico. You can still see the remains of it today with all of the outline of where Herod's temple was. And you discuss matters of Torah and matters of interpretation. An illiterate person could not do that. You have to have puns on words and so forth. I'll give you a concrete example that's in the book. This is very interesting because it connects Cephas to Jesus and to his literacy. Did you know that Rabbi Eleazar, the famous rabbi of the 2nd century, who thought positively of Jesus and got in trouble for it by some of his colleagues who were confusing any memory of Yeshua as positive as being endorsing Christianity as it was developing in a different way. So there was a lot of negativity in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century from Jews and rabbis against Christians because of what they had become. They departed wholly from the faith. But this is dated maybe around 110, 120, just right in the early 2nd century when Eleazar lived. And on one occasion, they're discussing a text in the Torah. So you have to know the Torah, and you have to know words, and you have to know the etymology of words. And it is that command in Deuteronomy that you should not give the wages of a harlot, a prostitute, to the temple. So they're discussing that. And apparently there are attempts at various times for people to give whose livelihood is questionable, let's say. And what should we do about it? And Yeshua's asked about it in this story. And he says, well, in the book of Micah, it talks about from filth goes filth. What about making toilets? no, it's not a sacred gift for the temple, but we got to have toilets. And Eleazar thought that was kind of a wise answer. It's a practical solution to a halakhic interpretation. And there are other sayings of Jesus that the rabbis record, and they're positive. Well, he has to operate within this world. So I think the Luke story of the 12-year-old, it's kind of a trope. Josephus talks about, about himself. When I was 12, all the doctors of the law consulted with me because I was so great. But Jesus didn't write that about himself. The Gospel of Luke is the one who contains the story. And I think it fits in that Jesus, and also Jesus is reading texts and quoting texts all the time. I gave a paper recently at Bart Ehrman's conference, New Investigations of the New Testament, where I questioned the idea that all the quotations are put in later in the Gospels, and Jesus would have never quoted any of these texts. And this is the fashion of some of my colleagues to kind of minimalize Jesus. He's poor, he's illiterate, he might have heard about the suffering servant, but he wouldn't have pored over those texts and tried to understand them and read them. And I think it's likely that he did. And one of the parallels, as you know, Aaron, is the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the teacher of righteousness writes first person accounts in the Thanksgiving hymns, and he talks about his suffering and how he is conforming to the image that he thinks is written about him in the prophets. So if he did it, you can see a generation later that other candidates who might think maybe God is calling me or speaking to me could also be able to find themselves in texts and so forth. So for all of those reasons, I think Lost is better. And the other thing about Lost, this is, I'll let you ask me some more questions, but I just want to point this out. I have an image that I've used. Maybe it's not the perfect image, but I kind of like it. It's a fairy tale image of breadcrumbs in the forest. And so I see this lostness as a dark forest. But as you walk along carefully and are observant, you pick up things. And the things that you pick up are not just insignificant. I just mentioned some of them. If Jesus is able later to dispute and discuss with rabbis, and he's even being remembered, that's a little breadcrumb. So I can put that into my story, you see. If Nazareth is just outside of Sepphoris, and Sepphoris is the urban capital, then he's not growing up in a backwater little village. It is a small village, but it's a suburb of Raphia, which is actually the largest town in the Galilee. So he's living right outside the largest town, which is outside the largest city. So what does that tell you about Jesus? And then the tecton and all the other things. These are little tidbits, little things along the way. I wish we knew more. But what we do know, as you saw in the book, when you put it all together throughout the book, we're fortunate. We do have quite a bit on Mary. It's just to assemble it together and see it as a whole that's important.
Yeah, wow. So much to unpack there. I do agree with you completely that it seems, I think a lot of times when I study scholars and academics, it seems to be like an easy way to look like an intellectual, to just be super skeptical of everything and be a minimalist. Oh, they didn't have that, they didn't do that. But I often think history is the opposite. I think ancient people, more often than not, were more capable than we think they were. And, we have Jesus in the story in Luke 4, going into the synagogue, reading the Isaiah scroll in Hebrew. Whether that was an identical story that happened, who knows? But it might be an attestation that Jesus would go and read scrolls in synagogues. And then, of course, Jesus is called rabbi. At the Jesus seminar, that was one of the criterion they said is very likely attributed to the historical Jesus, that he was called rabbi. And if he was a rabbi, that means he was a teacher of the Torah. I think our friend Ross Nichols says that if he was called rabbi, he was essentially like a scholar of the Torah in his day. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. It's hard to compare with modern standards for being a rabbi. Like you'd have 3 years of graduate school and pass exams
Right.
and so forth. So it's nothing like that. But the point is, you have to be able to discuss the substance of the text, the various interpretations, the oral interpretations, And so many of these turn, as you know, just read the Mishnah, read a little bit of the Talmud, read the Tosefta. It turns on understanding the language and even the letters of the language and the roots of the words. And I think we should put him within that camp. The other thing is start looking in the gospel. Start with Mark, and then you get the main narrative. But then look at what Matthew and Luke add as well. Get you a parallel where you can see. And we get things like, and Jesus went up into Tyre and Sidon up on the coast. These are major cities on the north. They're outside of the land of Israel. Jesus is up at Caesarea Philippi in the far north, not far from Damascus. What about this? And Jesus went through all the cities of the Decapolis. These are these 10 Hellenistic Roman cities on the other side of the Jordan, and he goes through all the cities of the Decapolis. Now, you can just say, as you've alluded to, oh, well, that's probably just the gospel writers trying to make him more than he is. But pretty soon, everything is minimalized. A few years ago, they used to say there were no first century synagogues in the time of Jesus. Literally.
Get
I'm
out of
talking about
here.
when I was in graduate school, no first century synagogues in the time of Jesus.
That's a
Okay, guess
crazy
what
claim.
now? We've got 11, I think. Got two at Migdal, or Magdala, as it's called.
Yeah.
Two. And we've got many have been to Masada. I bet many of your viewers, if they had a Holy Land trip, they went to Masada. You go in the first century synagogue. It's very clear that there were synagogues in all of these major cities. Josephus is so helpful. Did you notice in the dedication, I credit Josephus as one of the people I thank for the book?
I didn't see that.
He's long gone, but he was an eyewitness. If he tells me
Yeah.
Sepphoris was the gleaming jewel of the Galilee and Jesus grew up outside it, I'm not speculating. And he's in the building trades. I'm
Mhm.
putting together the evidence, I think, in a responsible way. And if you say, or someone says, well, I don't know that those were brothers. My church said that they were cousins. They were actually children of Joseph's brother. And Joseph was an old man, 94 years old. And he was kind of this caretaking father that had the young Mary at age 14, and they're living together. This, first of all, it's I don't like this idea. This is a crazy idea. This is not Jewish marriage. Uh,
Yeah.
Joseph has got to be. He's probably a bit older than Mary. That would be typical. Let's say Mary's 14, and maybe he's 18 to maybe 20, because 20 is the adult male age, and 14 or 15, 16 for maybe childbearing. And so that's probably what he was. But so I would just say, well, that doesn't really fit the evidence. First of all, if he knew her not until she brought forth Jesus, they're living a normal married life. My grandmother, Aaron, had 11 children. One died, so that's 12. She bore 11 children. And she had those children by the time she married early, like Mary did. Probably, I think she was 14. And you tend to have if you nurse and don't use birth control, you want the big family, just let nature take its course. You'll have a child about every 2 years when you average in nursing and weaning and so forth, because that's the cycle of a human of human reproduction, and it's well known. If you do any genealogy, I've done some of my genealogy on both sides. Countless times I come to someone and then they list all those children. I go, and had 8, 10 children and 2 or 3 died. This was so common in the just in our own history in America, much less in the ancient world. So, or someone else says, well, okay, so they are Joseph's children by a previous marriage, but he never would have touched Mary. And again, he's an older man who had children. And just these are things made up by
Yeah.
people. So I'm not making something up. I'm quoting our earliest source, Matthew 1:25, and I'm bringing in the context of Jewish life and marriage in the first century. These are children of Mary. But what's really important is to realize why this is offensive to people, because it's offensive for a very poor reason. And that is that Hellenistic ideas and Hellenistic dualism begin to downgrade the body, downgrade the world. The earth is the lower part of the universe. Heaven is our home, and anything earthly is therefore inferior, and it's corruptible, and it's rotting. Basically, we're kind of like all aging and rotting and dying, and it's the opposite of the Hebrew view of l'chaim, to life. You read Genesis 1, how many times does it say, and everything that God made was good, good, good? I think it's 7 times, and the last one is very good, before you come to the Sabbath in that creation hymn that's so beautiful in Genesis 1. And so the idea of the earth being the place to be. I love the Robert Frost poem, Birches. He talks about young boys going up birch trees when he was young in New England, and then you ride the tree down because it's like a sapling, and you get a ride, and then you got to jump off and catch yourself on the ground. And he makes this wonderful poem about birches, swinging left to right across the line of greater trees. And then he talks about, at the end, he makes it poetic. He says, when I finally land on earth after swinging on the birch tree, the earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. I'd like to put that on the front of my book. Robert Frost endorses Tabor's book. Don't you love that? And
That's
then
a
he
good one.
said, I had a lover's quarrel with the world. Oh, I love that. Meaning, life is tough, and it's hard to find meaning, and it's hard to explain things. But our quarrel with the world is a lover's quarrel. Whereas in the Hellenistic world, a lover of the world? Are you kidding? You're not a lover of the world. Heaven
Yeah.
alone is your home. Think of all the Christian hymns. I'm just passing through. I'm a
Yep.
pilgrim. I'm a wanderer. This is a dark and lonely land. It's sinful. It's fallen. It's wicked.
I used to sing
All of
them.
these are from Neoplatonism that was developing rampantly in the first, second, third, fourth century. The church fathers were affected by it. And they
Oh,
had a
yeah.
terrible view of women. In Judaism, women are exalted and women are honored as the matriarchs of a Jewish home. And there are many, many things about women. Now, I do think that Jesus extended that in a wonderful way. For example, the Mary and Martha story. It's such a great story in the Gospel of Luke, where these two sisters are hosting Jesus and his entourage in their home. And Martha, maybe I don't know, she might have been the older sister. Seems like she might have been. She's fixing the meal in the kitchen, you might say. She's in the kitchen cooking the biscuits, we say, right? She's getting everything ready. The men are in another room learning the Torah, listening to the teacher, the rabbi. And Mary slips in and sits along with the men. And Martha can't believe it. Like, she's not in class. She's not enrolled for this course. She's a woman. And so she comes to the door. You get this vivid picture, and she says, Master, sorry to interrupt you. Mary needs to come in and help me. We women are in probably where other sisters and people helping. We're fixing the meal for you guys. And Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you're troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. Do you realize that we have co-ed education in Jesus? That one teaching.
Wow. Yeah.
Harvard, Yale, Princeton, William and Mary. I taught at William and Mary for, 5 years before I came to Charlotte. These were men's schools. And as Bob Dylan said in one of his songs about women, kind of facetiously, I hope, uh, can you cook and sew and make flowers grow and understand my pain as a male? That's what a woman does, right? And Jesus says, no, that's not what a woman does. And within Judaism, there are stories of Torah giants, of women that were remarkable. I have a good friend that you know of, and you know his work, Simcha Jacovici, the Emmy-winning filmmaker. And I'm in his house often for Sabbath. And we're sitting around the Sabbath table. Sometimes they're guests. And he's got a family of 5. And you've got these girls, women, growing up. They're grown now. And then one son. And it's so funny to watch because what we do after the meal is discuss the Torah portion of the week and those girls are amazing. You say, well, that's the modern world, Tabor. No, girls all through history, women, uh, they learn, they listen, they're smart, they're doing various things. There's a division of labor, maybe in terms of trade versus village life, but this idea that women were, men are ignorant and illiterate, and women, they're just practically slaves. That's not true in a good Jewish home. I don't think it is. We do have sources for this. It's not just we have archaeology, and we also have texts that do go back to that time. So I want to put Mary into that picture.
Yeah, so much good stuff there. I completely agree that so much of history, especially outside Judaism, has been very misogynistic, highly masculinized, and it's always been crazy to me. Since even when I was a Christian, I was like, "Are we sure she was a virgin?" But especially after leaving Christianity, it's like, wow, you got Matthew 125, as you pointed out, that explicitly says it. And then, of course, you read the textual traditions and the manuscripts, and some of them have, Joseph begat Jesus. And then you see the brothers listed, and you're like, how can millions of people believe that she was a perpetual virgin? And it's only because you have to enforce this framework onto Mary and the New Testament of this, like you said, Hellenistic dualism, sexuality is evil, women are inferior to men. And so, although the title of your book is The Lost Mary, you can very well also have titled it What Mary Lost, as you said,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
one of the biggest subjects we hammer on this podcast, which we've learned a lot from you, is the erasure of James and even Simeon as well. And that was the one thing from your book that really struck me the most, Dr. Tabor, was when you went into why did they have to, virginize Mary this way? And why couldn't they have just accepted she was a normal woman? Well, most people say, well, because you can't imagine that Jesus Christ, the Holy Son of God, was born through sexual intercourse. And that's what I've always believed up until listening to this book. And you say, actually, you think there's better reasons for thinking that they virginized Mary because of the erasure of James, that they had to get, this towering figure of James out of the picture because that proves Mary was, bore other children other than Jesus. So the implications of that are really big. But you go to the Vatican, for example, and you'll see Peter, you'll see Paul everywhere, lots of saints,
Right.
no James in sight. And it's like, this was the guy who Jesus pointed to as his successor, his own blood brother. And he led the church. Like, Jesus's ministry was maybe 3 years at most, and James leads the church for almost 30 years. And he was, this incredibly noble figure that was widely revered and regarded as being kind of Jesus 2.0 after Yeshua was crucified. And it's all lost, all covered up and erased by the Catholic tradition to preserve the perpetual virginity of Mary. So can you say a little bit about that and how that affected
Absolutely. And
Jesus' time?
so it's really unfortunate because you have two forces that begin to operate simultaneously. One is the Neoplatonic Hellenistic dualism that denigrates everything earthly and material,
Mhm.
and and sexuality is one of the first casualties of that. So that
Yep.
the celibate life is the holy life, and also bodily functions. One of the more shocking things in the book is the discussions that later take place among Christian theologians about whether Mary went to the toilet or Jesus. You talk about extreme. It's one thing, okay, she didn't have sex, but she also didn't go to the toilet. Well, did she eat? Yes, but she ate a
And she didn't
perfect
eat.
amount of
Yeah.
food and water and never had any elimination. We're just in la la land. Okay.
Her
But the
body was
other force,
invisible.
you see how powerful that force is. And you read the church fathers, and I hate to trash them, but one of them deserves trashing. Tertullian is horrible, the things he says about women.
Wow.
Josephus says horrible things about women, and he's even Jewish. But he's been so influenced by this Roman culture or his failures, because he had a lot of marriages. And he says, the Essenes are so admirable because they don't marry, and we're not even sure about that, right? He says that. But he says, because they found that no woman will ever be faithful. So maybe he's reflecting his own experience. Okay, that's one
Sounds like a projection.
projection. But the other force, yes, what you allude to, and it's just as powerful, is not only does she not have children, But the second born child, James, Yaakov is his Hebrew name, he took over the leadership of the movement. So now we have a caliphate. God forbid. I know that's a Muslim term, but actually it's not. It means khalaf, to replace. And the idea, Muslims talk about a caliphate, and Shia and Sunni are divided over who succeeded Muhammad. But it didn't start with Muslims. A caliphate is the idea that the Davidic line is a caliphate, right? In other words, each descendant of David has to be a descendant of David in order to be king. So you had the northern kingdom that doesn't observe that, kind of like the Sunni and the Shia in ancient Judaism, right? You read the Hebrew Bible, and what do you find? But in Judah, every single king can trace their lineage back to David, person by person, all the way back. And we have all the records and chronicles and kings and so forth of the claims that they made. So that pedigree is very important. Well, you come to the Jesus movement and you go, pedigree for it. Jesus didn't care about that. Who cares about succession or anything like that? So 20 years ago, I wrote a book, 20 years and coming up this coming year, called The Jesus Dynasty. And I picked that title deliberately about Jesus and his royal family and how they were written out of the story of the early church. Specialists know, but people in the pews don't, and people in my classrooms don't. When I taught at Notre Dame, my first job, 1980s, 79, I got the job through the 80s. The University of Notre Dame, South Bend, Indiana, bastion of Catholic graduate and undergraduate work. And I would mention James, well known to anyone who studied the sources, and also to Paul, who says, I went up to Jerusalem, I saw Peter,
Right.
yeah, but then I saw the pillar of the church, the head, James, the brother of the Lord. Well, maybe he was a cousin, maybe he was a stepbrother. No. These are children of Mary. And they have to be, because they have to be of the lineage of David, and they have to, they are his brothers. And James takes over. And then we get a text like the Gospel of Thomas, 1945, dug up in Upper Egypt at Nag Hammadi, a place nobody's ever heard of, by a farmer digging for fertilizer. And he finds this jar and he pulls out the Gospel of Thomas that you've talked about so much. And what does it say? Is it saying 14, I think? It's very early on, 12, 13, 14.
Something like that, yeah.
The disciples say, well, what are we going to do when you leave us? We're going to be orphans. He goes, no. Wherever you go, wherever you wander, whatever happens to you, go to James the Just, for whom heaven and earth came to be. Not only does he say that he's just, but he's referring to a Jewish tradition. It's called the Lamed Vavniks. It's the righteous ones that sustain the world. The 36 righteous. The idea is that it's just tradition. I mean, I don't necessarily believe it, but it has a point to it. And the point is, if you're called the just one, you're one of those for whom heaven and earth came to be. The world is very wicked. It's full of sin. It's full of sadness, tragedy, suffering, horrible things happening right now as we speak all over the globe. I mean, if we could see it all, our brains would explode. There's also good. Okay, we know that, but there's a lot of evil, and it's the evil that really cuts us and wounds us and brings us down. So why would God keep the world going, so to speak? This is a rabbinic question. Why would God sustain the world? It goes back to Abraham in their discussion about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and whether it was wicked enough. And finally, Abraham talks to God just like a friend. He's actually called Yahweh or Jehovah. And he's, it's not just an angel. It says, and Abraham stood before the Lord. And he says, well, what about this many and this many righteous? And finally gets down to 10. He says, even for 10, I would save the whole city. The city might have had thousands and thousands of people. So that's the idea. And James then is not only a pillar of the church, and it's not really the church, the movement, a pillar. And Peter is a pillar, and John is a pillar. The son of Zebedee, we think, is that John. So Peter is not at the top. James is at the top. And the proof of this is embedded in the New Testament, and nobody noticed. I did not notice it growing up. And I read the Bible voraciously 12, 13, 14, 15. I was a Bible kid. I love the Bible. How many
Same.
times had I read the book of Acts? And you know what I missed? Acts 15.
Mm-hmm.
Acts 15. Peter comes in from the field. He's been going to the Jews. That's his mission. Paul comes in. He's been going to the non Jews. Big question. If non Jews want to join the Jesus movement, what do they need to do? Do they need to convert formally to Judaism, or can they come in as righteous Gentiles? The answer they all agreed on eventually was they can come in as righteous Gentiles. But there were others who said, no, they have to convert to Judaism. These are members of the movement. They were mostly from the Pharisaic side, we think. And they thought Paul was going too liberal. He's allowing all these Gentiles in. They're not going to be living righteous lives sexually and with idolatry and so forth. And then we get this thunderous verse where everybody's through speaking. James speaks, Paul speaks, all the brethren are there, all the apostles are there. And what does it say? It says, and James stood up, and I'm gonna hit the table. My decision is that we trouble not those who are turned to God from idols among the Gentiles, but we write them, and then he gives the basic halakhic requirements for non-Jews. Now, then he says, but Moses is preached in every synagogue, and so they can come and learn more. But in order to begin to be part of us, they just need to turn from idols, not commit fornication, not eat blood, which has to do with vegetarianism and how the animal is slaughtered. Some would take it as fully vegetarian. Others would say, well, it's how the animal's killed. But either way, you cannot buy your meat in the market, where they've used these practices of knocking the animal in the head, hanging it upside down, as you see all over the world today in various countries. We hide our slaughter, so we don't see them hanging up. But anyway, so that's the point. As James stands up, what do you mean my decision is? Why didn't I ask myself, James who? I don't know. I just never occurred to me. Later, I learned that's James, the brother of Jesus. Oh, yeah, he's in charge of the Jerusalem church. Okay, that's why he's named. No, he's not in charge of the Jerusalem church. Go to the letter of James. I don't care if James wrote it or not. It's in his name. He might have had people say it's really good Greek. He couldn't have possibly known Greek like that. I'm not so sure we know much about him. Are you saying a Jewish person in the first century couldn't learn Greek and be good in Greek? It's true that Josephus had help, and he wrote his books, at least the Jewish War, first in Aramaic because that's his native tongue. But that would be true of any writer. My German is pretty good. I lived in Germany. I read German books and so forth. But if I'm going to write for a German audience, I would write it in English and get a good native translator. So it doesn't prove that James had help to bring it over into a literary Greek, that he didn't write it. As far as the ideas, it is James all the way. How would I know that? Well, it's just like his brother. Take the so-called Sermon on the Mount or the double sayings material that scholars call Q and read what it says. Read James. It's like he's almost quoting the same thing as Jesus. He upholds the 10 Commandments. He upholds the Torah. But notice the beginning. James to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Do you realize what that is? And I don't know that I made this point in the book. That means that he is the leader, the Davidic leader now of the nation of Israel.
Amazing. Wow.
That's what he says.
I didn't catch that.
You say, well, he's not recognized. No, he's not recognized. But he believes in God's eyes, Jesus was raised up as the Messiah and crucified and rejected. And he believes he's ascended to heaven and been raised from the dead. He also believes he is now the successor of Jesus, so he can write to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Paul can't write to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. He has no position of authority. Why does Jesus choose 12 apostles? We're told in our earliest source, the Q source, as we call it. I don't care if you call it XYZQ or what, but it's the sayings that Matthew and Luke have in common. Let's don't call it anything. Let's just call it that are not in Mark. Take the material Matthew and Luke both have is not in Mark. It's a very valuable source of Christianity before Paul, you might say. It's our
Yeah.
earliest material. The Jesus Seminar mainly used that material. And what's the last saying in Luke? Jesus is at the Last Supper, and he says, well, some of his last words, "You who have followed me in my suffering and tribulation are going to sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." What is he doing? He's
Yeah.
setting up a provisional government for the future kingdom of God. Now, did it come about? No, because they killed the leaders, and it was aborted, basically. It was destroyed.
Yeah.
Jesus is crucified. James is rejected by the priestly establishment. And yet he was very well regarded by the people. He was allowed to go into the temple. We even have sources that say he went into the Holy of Holies and he wore the
Yeah.
priestly mitre and the high priest's, or at least the priestly garment, but maybe the high priest's garment, because that's mentioned in our Ebionite sources that Jesus gives to James the garment from the high priest. What is that? What is this garment that's mentioned in these sources? It's some sort of a robe that you would wear in the Nazarene movement that would say that you are in fact in charge. So we could pass that off as just some cultish fantasy. Oh, these people think that they're going to rule the world and all of Judaism is going to turn to them. But yes, they did think that. They believed Jesus was the king. They believed that James was his successor. And then Simon, some say that Simon is a cousin, but then you're getting into this whole thing about, oh, Joseph can't have sex and Mary can't have sex. And, Simon's old. There's no doubt that he's old. And he's crucified under Trajan. So he's over 100 years old, but people can live to that age, especially a patriarch like that who has this mission. And, there are records in the New Testament of people being quite old into their 90s and so forth. And so to say that can't be the brother of Jesus, just because he's called a cousin in later sources. Everybody's called a cousin in later sources because we don't want Mary to have
that works.
So yes, she's robbed of her children. She's robbed of the leadership that they embodied. And I hate to say this, Aaron, the sorrow that she genuinely felt. Now, everybody knows she watched the crucifixion of Jesus. And I don't know that she watched the stoning of James because she would have to be an elderly woman in her 70s or 80s. But we have no record of when Mary died. And if we have no record, you know what that usually means? It's past 70, because that's when we don't get records. We don't get these kinds of memories because so much gets wiped out by that terrible destruction. The memory of James gets wiped out. If it wasn't for Paul's letters and that one thing in the book of Acts, and notice the writer of Acts doesn't explain it. He doesn't say, and then James, the brother of Jesus, the ruler and leader of the community, stood up and said, my decision is. But he can't leave out my decision is. Because if he leaves that out, he can't have him stand up. At least he's honest enough to put that in. But that also makes Mary lost. So it's the Neoplatonism, the Hellenistic dualism, the denigration of the world and so forth. And the idea of heaven is our home, and we just need to think of heavenly things, not earthly things, but also the removal of the church, really, the original founding movement. I don't like calling it Jewish Christianity. I know you don't either. Sometimes it's useful just to make the point. It's Christianity. Yeah. It's Jewish. It's Judeo-Christian. Okay, but why should I have to hyphenate it? It's because our language is broken down by later theology. So if you say Christian, you mean the later Latin and Greek church that developed in the 4th century on, particularly with the Nicene Creed, the Chalcedon Creed, and all the dogma. But if you go back to the 1st and early 2nd century, there's no question that before 70, Jerusalem is the center of the movement, and James is in charge. And so we're told to go to James the Just. which you would still do today. And if you look at the book of James and look at the Q material, the material that Matthew and Luke have in common that's not in Mark, and study those texts, you're getting close to Mary. And as you know, what I do at the end of the book is I assemble all of that material, that rich material, and I divide it into 5 categories. And I want to know what you thought of that, because essentially I say this is the package of the Jesus James movement, and I think it comes from his mother. Now, someone could say, you don't know, Tabor. You do not know that his mother taught all those things.
We don't know anything from the ancient world.
Yeah, I sent you a review of I didn't mind the review. It's someone who talked about me at Notre Dame, and this reviewer is saying he still is very devoted to the Mary of theology and so forth. But he doesn't trash me for doing history. It's almost like I'm down here doing this stuff and he's doing this stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's shake hands and get together, but don't mix this with this. You know, she's having sex, she's having kids. When you say she's having sex, it's like, what did I say something dirty there? We're talking about, this is like, what has happened to us? We're not Puritans anymore. We've gone too far the other way for sure in our culture. But the idea of a home and a marriage and a family is a wonderful thing for most of us. We treasure that first and foremost in our lives, next to our faith and our relationship with the Creator. I mean, whether you're married or not, you have a family, you had a mother. And so, yes, I see her as the matriarch. Notice, Paul goes up to Jerusalem and sees James. And you want to go, well, where was Mary? But the worst transgression, and I think it's a transgression that anyone could ever make, is to turn the beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved, who laid against him at the Last Supper, who whispered to him things that weren't shared with the table. Not Mary Magdalene. I don't agree that it's Mary Magdalene. It's James, the brother of Jesus. And everybody, what? How could you say that? We all know it's John. And I want to say, how do you know it's John? People, I taught this on a cruise recently, a BAR cruise, Biblical Archaeology Society cruise. And there were several people, traditional Christian, they were shocked by that more than all the other things I said that I thought would be really shocking. Well, it's John. Why do you think it's that fisherman, John, son of Zebedee, is the beloved disciple? How did you decide that? Give me the evidence in the New Testament. Let's start with that. We go. Let's see. Well, why don't we start with 2 stories of the Zebedee boys? We only have 2 stories of those boys, that are individual stories. One is they want to burn up a village that didn't accept them. And Jesus rebukes them very sharply and says, you don't know what spirit you're of. Wait a minute, what spirit you're of? That's like saying you're not reflecting the Holy Spirit here. You're reflecting another spirit of destruction. The second is, Master, I know you don't want to talk about who's great and who's least, and every time we bring it up, you kind of rebuke us, but could we just ask, please? Could we be on the right and left hand when you come to the kingdom? You've chosen 12, but could we be the please? And Jesus, again, you don't know what you're asking. And what he says is, are you ready to suffer the most? And of course, we can do that. And then, of course, a few days later, they run
away. Yeah.
So actually, not a few days later, the next, they're on the road already. So it probably is a few days later when they get to Jerusalem. But it's the last thing that they ask right as they come to Jerusalem. Now, do I hate them? Do I hate, Peter, Andrew, James, and John? They're mentioned first. Of course, they're mentioned first because these lists of apostles are later assembled. And who do you put at the bottom? James, Simon, and Jude, the 3 brothers of Jesus. You say the brothers of Jesus are among the 12? Tabor, how could you say that? Well, I don't know absolutely for sure that that's the case, but isn't it interesting that James, Jude, and Simon, we don't have anything from? And they're listed last with Judas Iscariot. It does make you wonder. Like Philip says things, Nathaniel says things, right? Peter says
Yeah.
plenty. Everybody else gets to talk. And then we get
Yeah.
to the last three. I think I might have told you this once, but when I teach and introduce this to people, I start with the list of the apostles and I say, close your Bibles, do not look, put your phones up. I got a question for you. Can anyone here name the 12 apostles? And a few people, well, I'll try. And they always, if they know anything, they'll go Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Ooh, first four, we got 8 to go. They kind of pause. Then they go, Matthew. See, they're like, these don't rattle off the tongue.
Yeah.
Matthew, Philip, Thomas. Oh, yeah, Thomas. Was there Bartholomew or Thaddeus? Oh, you've got 4 to go. 4 to go. Let me see. Judas Iscariot. 3 to go.
Who are the last three?
I don't remember the last 3. James, Jude, Simon. Go to Mark 6, verse 3. So I lean toward that. I don't think I made a big deal of it in the book. There's enough things for people to absorb, but I lean toward that. And Aaron, I'm going to send you an article. In fact, I'll give you the link. You can put it into your description.
Great.
By a statistical mathematician who wrote an article for an academic peer-reviewed book arguing that statistically, those 3 most likely are the brothers of Jesus. Very interesting article. And he does it with
awesome.
math. His name is Drew Sills, and he was just appointed a full professor of mathematics and statistics I think it's the University of South Carolina. So, wow. So it's possible. Wow. But either way, you don't denigrate James and then go, James who, and who is he, and why are you mentioning him, and so forth. And people just don't know. Yeah. They don't know.
Yeah. Well, to that point, in the New Testament history class I'm taking, one of the things the text pulls out on the chapter on Luke is that Luke has this rhetorical goal of, hey guys, the Jews rejected the Messiah. So now, shifted to us, the Gentiles. It's now a Gentile movement. And they're really trying to hammer that point. So being the writer of Luke and Acts, it doesn't surprise me that Luke would have downplayed James's importance in that chapter in Acts 15. And maybe also because Luke has the famous virgin birth narrative, and he's probably trying to preserve the perpetual virginity of Mary. So there's a lot of rhetorical goals there you can see already in Luke to downplay James, a lot of which goes back to Mary. And one of the things you pulled out that I also found very interesting is the genealogies. And I always assumed that the genealogies were just kind of fabricated, trying to tie Jesus to the Davidic lineage and all that. But I was surprised to hear you say that you actually think there's really good evidence that Mary literally was of the Davidic line. And I found that to be really exciting news. And I started doing some research on it and cross-referencing what you were pulling out and said, wow, yeah, there actually is a lot of evidence for this. So can you say something to that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Now, here I'm going against the mainstream flood of all of my colleagues who would say, see, let me explain it like this. We've got 2 genealogies of Jesus. They both seem to go to Joseph. Well, they can't both be right. So we've got Matthew chapter 1, the famous begets that we open the New Testament and get, and he begot, and so forth. And that goes from Abraham to Jesus. You open Luke chapter 3, and it goes from Jesus all the way back to Adam, the more universal Gentile idea of, he's the son of Adam, not just son of David. But David is in the line. But when you come to David, it's not Solomon. Who's David succeeded by? Solomon. Matthew has Solomon. Luke doesn't have Solomon. He has another name. What's going on there? That's the key. And what is that other name? Nathan. Now, in the time of David, there's a well-known Nathan who's a prophet, but he's not related to David. He's the spokesperson of God to rebuke David and teach David, and David consults with him as the prophet of his time. But he's not his son. But you check the records, and we do have sons of David listed through Bathsheba, and guess what? One of them is named Nathan. So David has hidden son, unknown son to us. He obviously knew the boy, and raised him. And also, it's from his wife, his favored wife, Bathsheba, a wife of Uriah the Hittite, the famous story of adultery and so forth. The first child died. Then Solomon was the next in line as the firstborn, and then Nathan. So here we have a very interesting lineage through a different son of David. It's still Davidic. All the prophets on the Messiah say, or of the Davidic figure, because he's really not even called the Messiah, but we call him the Messiah today. All the prophetic texts, there are 10 of them. We did this in my book, Restoring Abrahamic Faith, remember, where we went through all those passages. They all say someone of the lineage of David. Well, Nathan's of the lineage of David. And then you trace it on down and you get to Eli, and then it says, as was supposed the son of Joseph, as was supposed. So, okay, so you're not tracing. Now, Luke is using that to say, oh, because he's born of a virgin, so he can't really be son of Joseph. But the way I would read it is Luke, without being that explicit, is saying, and then people thought he was the son of Joseph. But I think it is Mary's genealogy. So why do I get in trouble for saying that as a scholar? Because my colleagues don't agree. All the fundamentalists and Bible harmonizers have that view. This is the classic view of early Christianity. It's the classic view of the apologists. Luke has Mary's genealogy. Matthew has Joseph's. Okay.
Harmonized.
And what's the critique of that? You're just trying to solve a Bible contradiction. And now Tabor's joined the fundamentalists. He must be a fundamentalist himself because he came up with this solution. Well, at least I can call Richard Balcom as a witness, who's probably the greatest expert on names and genealogies of the Jesus family. And he wrote this wonderful book, I hope you have, Jude and the Relatives of Jesus in the Early Church, where he traces the Desposunai, the family of Jesus. And you know what he says? He doesn't agree with me. He doesn't say it's Mary's genealogy. He said, I believe, and he gives all the reasons, that this is a legitimate genealogy. It's not made up. And I argue that it's Mary's, because if you look at who the father is, it's Eli, and Eli and Jehoiakim. Eliakim and Jehoiakim are names of Davidic rulers, kings in the line of David, and they sound really different. But one is using Elohim, Eliakim, Elohim. The other is using Jehovah, Jehoiakim. But they're for the same king. And what is Mary's father in tradition? Now, this is unrelated to Luke, but we have one tradition in the Proto-Evangelium of James about Mary's father. His name is Jehoiakim. So Luke's genealogy actually uses the name Eli, and I think that's Mary's father, Jehoiakim. So I think it's Mary's genealogy. But the big thing about that genealogy is it's priestly as well as Davidic. It has all of these priestly names. I'll name one that everyone will know, Levi. How about that for a priestly name? How about Yani and Matat? Remember the apostle Matthew is also called Levi because he's Levitical and priestly. I think there's 6 or 8 Matats, Matan, various forms of Matthew in that lineage. You go over to Joseph's lineage in Matthew 1, there are none. So this is I would even argue that it's a Maccabean lineage. Now, guess what? I've held that view for years. I put it in the Jesus Dynasty as well 20 years ago. But what I didn't know is that in the Eastern Church, they preserve this idea. Not in the West. The West, they lost it. James goes, everything goes. But in the East, they knew this. And what they say, and you can look at my notes in the book, there are very full notes in the back of the book, academic notes. I give you the sources. And in the Eastern Church, they're aware in the 4th, 5th, 6th century, in the Byzantine period, that Jesus has this double lineage, priestly as well as of the tribe of Judah and of the lineage of David. So I present all that in the book. And I think it makes Mary doubly royal. And it would explain then a mystery that we've never been able to understand. How could James wear the priestly garment and wear the mitre and go into the Holy of Holies? Now, everybody dismisses that. Remember, he has the knees like a camel and he wears the priestly mitre and he goes into the Holy of Holies. How could he do that? Well, he could do it if the Nazarenes are allowed to keep certain festivals by their calendar, and it's different from the Pharisees' calendar and the Sadducean calendar. You see?
Right.
So it could be that the Romans at some point, maybe after some of the troubles under Pontius Pilate, because it was very, very troubled during from 26 to 36. And then things kind of calmed down. And the reign of Tiberius, what is it, 14? He gets in 14, I think. That basically things are a little more calm in Judea, don't have as many uprisings and so forth. It could be, and here I'm speculating, but we do have a text that says James was allowed to enter the holy areas of the temple. Well, if he's not of priestly lineage, he couldn't even get past the court of the men. So
Yeah.
is this just made up? But it comes from a very early source. And Eusebius preserves it, but he quotes Hegesippus. Well, Hegesippus is a Jewish Christian. By that I mean he was
Yep.
Jewish and he lives in the land of Israel and he's from that region in
Nazarene.
the east. So they know, and he's the one who reports this. And he tells about
Right.
this horrible death of James that Mary could have lived to have witnessed. She only needs to live till 62 AD to witness this terrible tragedy of James being stoned to death and beaten to death with a wooden club. It's just can't even stand to read it.
Really
And then
sad.
he's buried right there in the Kidron Valley. So, boy. So yeah, look, I'm not writing anything in stone. I'm offering an alternative hypothesis, and I think it should be discussed and not just dismissed as, oh, Tabor became a fundamentalist. He's trying to harmonize the Bible. First of all, I didn't harmonize it. What did I harmonize? I'm saying they're very different. They're not harmonious at all. It's not his lineage. But I don't think Luke just makes up names. Luke has sources. He has the Q source. He checked Acts has that we section. Now, some people say, well, he just made that up for literary effect. Okay, maybe that's another view. But it could be when you look at the nautical terms that are mentioned and all the details about the shipwreck that are in that section, and we sailed here in the storm and the winter, it reads to me like a travel diary. He might have gotten hold of something like that. What he says in his preface is people are writing different accounts, and I decided to write one also to a patron, Theophilus, and I have gathered everything I could gather. So most people put him, in the 70s or 80s? Can you imagine, Aaron, if we could go back, you and I, to the 70s or 80s and travel around the Holy Land and travel around Syria and go east of the Jordan where the Desposinai had gone, the family of Jesus, and interview groups at that year after the destruction of Jerusalem and say, do you have any traditions? Do you have any records? And guess, I mentioned this in the book, guess what? The records for the royal lineage and for all the main families were kept at Sepphoris. At Sepphoris.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that's in Josephus, that they have the records. It's sort of like the court records in a county seat or even the Social Security records in Washington, D.C. There's always a place where everything legal like that is kept. People don't just go, oh, I'm from this or that. Well, you have to show. You could name your father or grandfather. You can't just say, my relatives came over on the Mayflower, because I just want to say that. Oh, really? Did you, could I see how you trace that? And you go to a genealogist. They had genealogists. They had more interest in genealogy than we do. Ours is kind of like, oh, I wonder where I came from. I'll go to one of these DNA things and figure something out. But no, these are serious genealogies, priestly families, who they marry, Davidic lineage. And you know how we know they had records? The Romans are trying to kill them. Vespasian, after the war, is searching for any descendants of David. How would he possibly know? Is he going to ask on the street? And people are going to go, no, not me. No, he has records, and he's trying to find where these people are. Why? Because he's going to kill them. He had enough of this Jewish messianism. And you say, well, that's just one emperor. No, Hadrian arrests two grandkids of Jude Jesus' brother. Is that not the most amazing thing? Two grandkids, and they're farmers now, and this would be 130, and they're still alive. They're older men now, and he tortures them, has them tortured to see, do you have any aspirations for revolution? Because you're coming from this line that goes back to this guy Yeshua, and your brother, and his kids, and now you. And they go, no, no, look at our hands. They're all callous. We're just farmers. We're just happy to live our lives here on earth. They apparently he didn't kill them. So to say that there were no records and it's impossible for Luke to have had this and he just made it up, I know that's the pat answer, but I went a little deeper, I think. And I think I've got some good arguments that.
Oh, man. I mean, you just pulled out a couple huge zingers I hadn't seen before, but I want to explain how you helped me to connect a big dot with that section on the genealogy, because I've always wondered, why did this segment of the Jews, east of the Transjordan, the Essene type of Judaism, why did they run to claim Yeshua was their fulfilled Messiah so quickly? And you have the Nazarenes and Ebionites surviving for many centuries, claiming he was the Messiah. And you pull out how in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they write of this two different Messiahs, a Davidic and a priestly Messiah. And so you showed how Jesus, through Mary, fulfills this lineage, this double royal lineage, Davidic and priestly. And so to me, that I connected the dot immediately when I heard that part of the book, because I said that would make sense why this huge segment of Essene type of Judaism east of the Transjordan rushed to claim Yeshua was their Messiah. They probably had records that they could confirm, hey, this guy really did fulfill the scriptures. Not unlike Hugh Schonfield pulls out in the Passover plot, like he really did fulfill what was written. And so this big segment of Jews said, he's our guy. And then, of course, Paul comes along and Hellenizes it and makes this Christian movement that's unpalatable to Jews, to like worship a man as a deity from heaven and stuff. But this Jewish Christianity, to use that semi-anachronistic term, they were seeing Yeshua as the Davidic Messiah that fulfilled these scriptures, and likely through Mary's genealogy. I just thought that was an amazing point.
Yes. And remember, Paul, for all of his innovations and developments from his own visionary experience, I've written 2 books on that, as you know, Paul and Jesus and Paul's Ascent to Paradise. He was a mystic. And he says in Romans 1:4, Jesus is descended according to the flesh from David. Right. Now, again, many of my colleagues would say, look, there's no evidence Jesus ever claimed to be Davidic or the Messiah. All these things are put in later by the church. Look, our earliest source, Paul, says, according to the flesh means he's a flesh and blood human being, and he comes from the line of David. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say that has more weight than later speculations by academics that just basically minimalize everything. So I guess I belong with the apologists on some things, but I don't think that's bad. I mean, it's not as though there are good apologists, by the way. Some apologists are educated and have good arguments, and they should be listened to and considered. I mean, Richard Balcom, I wouldn't call an apologist, but he's a believing Christian. And Richard's research is amazing. That book, Jude and the Relatives of Jesus in the Early Church, if you don't have it, make that one of your next books to read. You will read that with a thrill. But also his book on the names in the New Testament and how works like the Gospel of Mark just mentions in passing the man who carried Jesus' cross. This is my favorite. Simon of Cyrene, everybody knows that. But why would Mark add to his reader, supposedly in Rome, like they would know, and his sons Rufus and Alexander? The movement at this point, when Mark is writing, it's a small enough movement that people know some of these people. There's travels. He expects his reader to go, oh, yeah, Rufus, I think I met him once in Antioch or whatever. These are people who've become leaders in the church. So taking a position like that is not always to be dismissed just because someone else who's Jimmy Dunn. I mean, everybody respects Jimmy Dunn's work. He's passed away now, a great loss to
Mhm.
all of us. So
Love
he's
Jimmy
a
Dunn.
more conservative believer. But you think his historical work is no good? So just to, I've heard people say, well, anybody who tries to harmonize Luke and Matthew, they're just doing a fundamentalist thing. I'm not doing a fundamentalist thing at all. I'm trying to understand what these texts
And you're
actually
not
say.
trying to harmonize them. You're just trying to find out what's true.
Actually, I'm not harmonizing them. Now, here's a new proof that I didn't put in the book because I thought of it later and it's growing on me, and I'm going to give it to you and your audience. First time. I've not mentioned this
Nice,
yet.
exclusive.
You guys are ready for open stuff. Book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews says it's evident our Lord came from Judah, clearly wants him to be Davidic. But then he's concerned that he can't be a priest. And so he says, well, he can't be from Aaron. Therefore, he has to be from this other priest, Melchizedek, from the book of Genesis, chapter 18.
Yeah.
Actually, 14, 15, 16, right in there. I think in 14 is when you first get him introduced, the king of Salem. Now, I never thought about that. And then I thought, wait a minute. I think Hebrews is pretty late. The temple could still be standing, some people think, because it says it's ready to pass away. I don't know if he means the temple or this whole Jewish system is ready to pass away. But either way, whenever it was written, could it be that that's written to oppose the view that Jesus also was priestly because James is really in charge? You see? And James is going to
Interesting
the
thought.
temple. And if you bring James up, you're going to have to say, James who? Brother. And you're going to have to go into the whole virgin birth thing and refute that. And you're going to have to take a stand that's basically an Ebionite stand. And it could be that the book of James is mainly written to say he can be a priest, guys. I thought of a way he can be a priest, but it's a heavenly priest based upon Psalm 110. And you go like, what? A heavenly priest? And then he makes him an eternal being. He says he doesn't have father or mother, beginning of days or end of days, but he's this kind of heavenly. Wait a minute. The guy in Genesis is not a heavenly guy. He had a father and a mother. And it's actually a misreading of Psalm 110. Let me throw this at you and see what you think. If you look at the Hebrew, you've been studying Hebrew. Does it say you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, every translation. So there's an order of Melchizedek. Now we got an order
Yeah.
of priests. Order means, like a
Yeah.
clerical
Lineage or
thing.
whatever.
Is that what it says? Here's what it says. You are a righteous king according to my, no, actually, we're going to do this right.
Better get it right.
You have your Hebrew Bible handy?
Not with me, no.
Okay. You
So
don't have
my
to have it. I'll just turn to it. So let me go to Psalm 110. Everybody get out your Bibles. It says, Ata Kohen Le'olam. You are a priest forever. All according to my word, O righteous king. According to my word. Now look at verse 1. I will tell the decree of the Lord. The Lord said to my Lord, and then it goes on, I'll tell the decree. What's the decree? You are a priest forever, according to my word, O righteous king. That's what it says. Look,
And that's the Hebrew.
Melchizedek. Now you could say, but there's a hyphen between Melchizedek, so it's a name. Who put that hyphen in? The scrolls don't have hyphens. You are a priest forever, according to my word. So one of David's sons is being declared a priest forever according to his word. Now,
Is that
in
davar?
hmm?
Is that the word davar? My word?
Devar, yeah.
Because it
Look at
says
it.
order in English. So
No, you
is
got to
that
look
even a
at the
possible
Hebrew.
meaning of davar?
Well, it could mean order if you want to make a priestly order out of it. But Jesus
If you
is
want to.
into this verse. Do you know it's the last thing he ever gave as a challenge to the Pharisees? They ask him question, 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 testing him in the temple. The last day was in the temple before the Last Supper. And he goes, I got a question for you. David writes about his Lord. Why does he call him Lord? If he's the Messiah, he's a descendant of David. Why does he call him Lord? And they go like, we're not answering that.
That's
And they
right.
don't have an answer. And he doesn't answer it because he's reading it like I'm reading it. Do you follow?
In Hebrew.
So a Davidic figure is now a priest. Now,
Wow.
the problem is priest in English. It's Kohen. We think
Mhm.
it comes from the word prepared one or something like that you're prepared to carry out the will of God. Now, another text, 2 Samuel 8. You can do the English on this. It'll probably be
Okay.
wrong, depending on your translation. It might not be. 2 Samuel 8.
Like, did they write this translation from the Septuagint or something? It's so different from the Hebrew you read.
Well, just read it in Hebrew.
Okay, I'll
Look,
get my
order
Hebrew
could
Bible
mean,
out.
you know how order can mean word, matter, thing, but to say that you're establishing a new order of the priesthood called the Melchizedek priest, and oh, Christians just
Yeah.
love this. It's also in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls
Oh,
have the figure Melchizedek, remember, in Cave 11. So it's in the air, but I'm not sure. But look at 2 Samuel 8, verse 18. Do you have that? I want you to read it in your
yes.
translation. What translation are you using?
I've got the NRS view.
Okay, it probably
8
won't
verse
have
16?
18, verse 18.
18.
2 Samuel 8, 18.
Okay. It says Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, sorry, was over the Korithites,
Karahites, yeah, these are just names. And the
Kerethites, and the
Pelahites.
Pelethites,
Mhm.
and David's sons were priests.
So, how about that? Shows
What?
you that priest doesn't mean. Did David not wear the ephod and dance before the ark? Okay, so what this is saying is there's going to come a priest in the future who will even be above David. The Lord said to my Lord. That's what Jesus. And
Ah, I see. I see.
he
Wow.
heard a decree of the Lord. David heard a decree of the Lord to this guy. It's not to him, it's to this guy. Study Psalm 110. Sit at my right hand. He's at the right hand of God. You
Yeah.
are a priest forever, according to my word, O righteous king. That's what it
Wow.
literally says. So it's not a
I've always
name.
kind of wondered what that passage
I
meant.
didn't put it in the book, but
Oh man. Well, you got to write a new book on that one, dude. That's a zinger.
you see how that would fit in. So James
Yeah.
is a successor of that new priestly line. It's a Davidic priestly line. Mary is the matriarch of that line, although she descends from it. And that's why you have this mixed genealogy.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is a perfect segue to my last question for you, which is on the last chapter. You mentioned that you wondered what I thought about it. Where'd my bookmark go? Did I not put it in here? There it is. One of my Hebrew note cards. I wanted to pull this out. So the last chapter is titled Mary's Message Then and Now. And you make some really interesting points. It was easily my favorite chapter of the book because it
Mm.
gets much more into the spiritual philosophy
It's
of
what you
Yeshua.
teach all the time, isn't it? Like that,
Exactly. It was
those five pillars of the teaching, they are what
just
you teach all the time, all the time. Yeah.
so good. And I wanted to read this quick segment and have you comment on it. You say, scholars pursuing the historical Jesus during the past 150 years have failed to consider the possibility of what we identify as the revolutionary gospel of Jesus goes back to Mary. Their efforts were born in the 19th century when women were largely marginalized from the academy, the church, and society at large. Women filled the role of helping and assisting the men in accomplishing great things. They might be credited with supportive influence, but always in the background, never as primary leaders. I think these scholars had things backwards. The quest for the historical Mary lies at the heart of any attempt to recover the messages of John the Baptizer, Jesus, and James, and thereby recover the nature and essence of earliest Christianity. The teaching and activities of Jesus released a mighty spiritual force that continues to have transformative power in our own time. But I am convinced that the wellspring of that force is most likely Mary herself. That was a very unique take that I hadn't heard before from anyone I've studied. And when you pulled it out in that last chapter, I really saw the thread you were pulling at. So can you just finish this kind of conversation today with a couple of little teasers from that, maybe?
Yeah, it's, I almost want to say that's pretty well written. And I wrote it. I don't know that I could write it right now. I was at a height of finishing the book, and I wanted to really bring it in with a crescendo, and I don't think I'd change a word of that. I wouldn't revise it at all.
It's a crescendo, all right.
Now, there are two challenges here. One is, the greatest challenge is, you don't know that, James. You don't know that. Mary could have been a dullard, or if we don't want to insult her, just a fairly common woman who never even thought of such things. And her brilliant revolutionary son, Jesus, and his amazing cousin, John, were just extraordinary. And the brothers were dumb and backward and had no interest in such things until after the resurrection, when James suddenly converts and becomes the priest and the leader. But until then, they just did not believe. Now, most of that I cover in the book throughout.
Yeah, a really good section.
So-called negative stories, first of all, they're not even negative. And if they are negative, it's an attempt to do the very thing that we've talked about, and that is denigrate and downplay the importance of the family. So no, I don't know that about Mary. You know why? Because the people who've overwritten her have done such a thorough job that I barely have anything left to argue it on.
Scraps.
Except I could say, and I do, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And what little we do know of her from our sources here and there, I think shows a great courageous nature. First of all, if you are nursing your baby and you see the flames of Sepphoris right outside your window, so to speak, and 2,000 people crucified, and you're holding a little Davidic child, I'm going to take this very seriously. This is not a thing of indifference. Also, when Joseph dies, we think early, he just disappears from the scene. He's not at the crucifixion. Why would we assume that she would even follow Jesus or be with him? We've got the early things of Luke. She goes down to be with Elizabeth. The two boys are close together. To me, it's a family affair from start to finish. And when you put it all together, then Jesus moves to Capernaum with his mother and brothers. Why are the mother and brothers even there? They should just stay in Nazareth. They had a business. Now they're in Capernaum. Well, if they're in Capernaum, they're part of the movement. That's the Jesus headquarters in Capernaum. It's usually called Peter's house. I think it's more likely the sons of Zebedee's house, because Peter and Andrew are from Bethsaida. But they have now moved and formed this fishing business, and it's right on the edge of the lake. If you go with me on my tours, I'll show you that house, and it is now becomes then a church and now a basilica today. It's a Catholic basilica. But you go on down to the lower level, it's a common house, but it's right on the shore. And so it's a prosperous fishing village. So I've got Mary at the scene, you might say. So I think there's more to argue for that it being a movement the mothers, the brother are together. In the book of Acts, Luke doesn't emphasize James in chapter 15, but what about chapter 1? He talks about the 12 apostles being gathered and they choose a successor for Judas, right? Matthias. And what is he? And his mother Mary and brothers were there. Were there. They're probably in charge, but see how he's overriding it. So I think the evidence, you can make a good case. Again, can you prove it? No. So that's one factor. But the other factor is the general point that I make. Why do we always assume that the woman isn't important? Now, if Jesus puts the care of his mother into the hands of the beloved disciple, slam dunk, that's James.
Yeah.
The earliest reference to it being John is in 180 by Irenaeus. He goes, well, John, the son of Zebedee, leaned on Jesus' breast. So all of a sudden, John is Jesus' intimate. We have no record of anything like that. But
doesn't the text of John
brother,
preclude that as well?
beg your pardon?
Doesn't the text of John itself preclude John from being the beloved? Because it names John and it names the beloved disciple as like a different character.
It does. I think it does. But that's the tradition.
That's what I gleaned from
Boy, as I was saying recently in that seminar I did, people are just like, how could you say that? They're so shocked. But it's based on nothing. And in fact, there are arguments against it. Now, the largest study I've ever seen on the beloved disciple is James Charlesworth. It's called the Beloved Disciple. It's about a 500-page book. He worked for years on it. And one of his, this is only in the Gospel of John where this is used. It's code so you don't have to say it's James. That's my bottom line. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to make, also he gets into the high priest's house. Let's add some more reasons. How could he get into the high priest's house? Peter can't get in. He's a fisherman from the Galilee. But John, a fisherman from the Galilee, can waltz right in, and the door person knows him and goes in the house of Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest, who's really running things, who's running the whole priesthood for most of the first century with his sons. 5 of his sons became priests. I mean, put this together, please.
Skeptical.
Get real, as we say, get real. The beloved disciple is not John. So who is it? Well, who would you put if your father has died and you have brothers and you're going to die now? Who would you say, and this is in Judaism, would what's going to happen to mom? You would say to your brother James, son, there's your mom. As you know, he's not telling him that's your mom. It's a formula. Son, behold your mother. Mother, behold your son. At that moment, James becomes head of the family and head of the movement. That's the inauguration of James as Jesus died. His last dying breath was, son, there's your mother. Mother, there's your... And I'm now in charge of mother, her well-being and so forth, because she is older now. And it's just a term of respect. So to make that somebody else is just, why would you do that? Just theology. You don't want it to be the brother because people are going to say, James who? And we're talking about the early church. In the 2nd and 3rd century, you do not want to mention James. Although Clement does, because he's early. Mm-hmm. Clement of Rome mentions James and says he received the chair, calls it a throne, of Jesus. The chair. We wonder if there was actually a chair they sat in. If you go to the Armenian Church of St. James, they show you the chair. They say this is an ancient chair, and James actually sat in this chair.
Wow.
But they don't think it's Mary's son. See, because they're basically go at the Greek Catholic view. Mary can't have sex.
The irony.
And they call him James the Less. James the Less. Well,
I was wondering about that name.
We don't know what it means. It could mean younger. I would think it means James the Younger. The fisherman's probably older, and he's maybe James the Younger. But either way, it's not the fisherman. It's not the son of Zebedee. So you go to Ephesus today. I just was in Ephesus with this group on the cruise. Oh, can we see Mary's house? I know that Mary moved to Ephesus in Asia Minor with John. I'm like, does that even make any sense that Mary, the mother of Jesus, would leave and go to Ephesus and live with the son of Zebedee, who's now in Ephesus? And even
And not
Eusebius
her
explains,
sons.
no, 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 there were two Johns. You're confusing him with this other John the elder that writes the epistles of
Right.
John, first, second, third John. And it's another John. It's not John the son of Zebedee the fisherman. So there apparently were two Johns. As far as the other John, like who wrote the Gospel of John, I don't know. I have no idea who wrote it. It could have been this elder John or something. But I do know that he has sources that he's relying on. And Mary Magdalene's the same way. How does he just, she suddenly shows up in Mark and she's at the head of a band of women and leading and guiding, and she's at the burial and at the crucifix. You know, who put her in charge of anything? Once again, you wouldn't know. And we still don't know much about her. The women are written out. They're not, they're mentioned clandestinely, but right at the end. And then, well, she has to have more of a history than just appearing at the cross, listed first with Mary, the mother, and then at the burial, she goes and visits the tomb with Jesus' sister Salome. And we assume I think Mary, the mother, is there too, because it says Mary of James in Mark. Mary of James is at the tomb.
Right.
People go, well, that's not the mother. That's some other Mary.
Man, it's just all
Got
over the
another
place.
James. Fine. So we got another Mary with three sons, James, Joseph, Jude, Simon, and it just gets crazy. So
yeah,
trying to put this together. But look, I'm open to change, open to criticism. I'm not dogmatic. I hope I'm forceful with things that need to be forceful. But back to your question, let's let the women speak. And especially a woman, the mother of the most extraordinary family in human history, with all that they accomplished. I mean, let's remember her as she was, and let's give her life back. Give her children back, for one thing.
Yeah, for
Maybe
crying out
close
loud.
with that. What would be the greatest insult to a woman who loves her children? Those aren't your children. You never had children.
Yeah. Ouch.
That's not your husband. I mean, if you haven't ever slept with him, he's not really your husband. So the marriage isn't consummated. So that's not your husband. The man you married is not your husband, and those children aren't your children.
Yeah.
That's just, why would you say such a thing? And I know
Only because you're trying to preserve dogma.
yeah, and yet I do want to say I'm not an iconoclast in that sense. That the sincere devotion people feel, I want to respect that and honor it, and I want to funnel it back to the real Mary. Take all of that devotion that people have, because at least the Catholics honor her and consider her great, and they would be the last ones to object that she's the inspiration behind much of this. They would agree with that. She's the greatest of the great in terms of a woman in all of history, and Jesus is the beloved son. So Catholics are almost there. They just need to take her from heaven, put her back in the Jewish village of Nazareth outside Sepphoris, and let her be herself again. And that would be real Marian devotion. I am for Marian devotion. Honor your father and your mother. Let's go back to the Ten Commandments. If you want to honor your father and mother, and you believe Jesus honored his father and mother, then we cannot lose his mother.
Well, I certainly want to commend you for writing this book, because I think you're doing with Mary what we're very much trying to do on this podcast with Jesus, which is to bring back the true historical Jesus. And, Albert Schweitzer famously began the quest for the historical Jesus in the early 1900s. And so who knows, maybe in 100 years, we'll look back and say, James Tabor began the quest for the historical Mary in 2025. It could very well be a future area of research and scholarship. And I think you've done some really amazing work here with the book.
Well, thank you, Aaron. And I would like to see a quest for the historical Mary by many, many colleagues. And I hope this can help to jumpstart it at least. And maybe some can do it better than I did in the future.